Hey guys, it's Bella and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another 12 Days of Christmas episode video. I'm doing a mystery video every day for 12 days up until Christmas, so I really hope you guys are enjoying them. If you are, then please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and let's get into today's case. So today we're going to be talking about the Kurim case, and I know I say this about a lot of cases, but this is honestly the most bizarre and most disturbing case that I've looked into. It's like some messed up fictional book that some sick person came up with. It actually reminds me a lot of the movie Orphan. So I'm gonna start on the 7th of May of 2007 because that's when this case was discovered, I guess, how it was kind of brought to light. So on the 7th of May in 2007 in Kurim, which is like a relatively small, safe little village, it's mostly middle-class people, they have a low crime rate, it's about 14 kilometers out of Brno, which is in the Czech Republic, and it is kind of just the last place you would expect anything like this to happen. A man named Edward was setting up a CCTV baby monitor so that he could keep an eye on his newborn son. And you know, obviously you have one monitor wherever you are so that you can watch the baby, and then another one of these monitors in the baby's room so that it can film and record the baby and the sound and everything. And so sometimes if maybe your neighbor or someone really close to you has one of these baby monitors, it can pick up the signal and get a little bit mixed, and that is what happened to Edward. So instead of seeing his newborn son's crib, he saw a young boy who was on a concrete floor. He had his arms and legs tied up behind his back. He was naked, he was dirty, he didn't look very well, and he was eating off the floor. And then occasionally there was an image of a woman's hand like coming in to feed him. Obviously Edward was incredibly shocked. He called the police immediately and they went door to door to try and find where the signal was picked up from. Most families were super cooperative. They were helpful. They let police look around. They tried to give them any information they could, but obviously there wasn't much to go off. It was just a boy in this tiny little concrete room, but you know, they did try to help where they can. Eventually police went to this little yellow house, and 31-year-old Clara and 33-year-old Katerina Mauerova, they were sisters, answered the door. Now, Clara is a single mom of 3. She has an 8-year-old son named Andre, she has a 9-year-old son named Jacob, and she has a 14-year-old adopted daughter called Anna, or Annika, as she's more commonly known by the media. She had a university degree in pedagogy, which is basically like she had a degree in teaching or knowing how to teach, and her sister also worked at a youth center called Paprasek. So they let the officers in, they were helpful, they let them look around until they got to this like closet or cellar door, and they completely refused to let them in. The police actually had to get the fire department in so they could bust the lock open so that they could see what was inside this locked door. And once they got in, it was clear why they were trying to hide it. It's because they found the boy from the baby monitor in there. The boy was Clara's 8-year-old son, Andre. He was in this tiny little cement room. It was full of his own vomit, his own excrement, and he was very dehydrated. As soon as they got in and saw the situation, they immediately arrested Clara and Katerina, and they took all 3 children into custody. And when they were in custody, Jacob and Andre very reluctantly told police and social workers about the abuse that they have been enduring for the past 8 months or so. When the boys were giving this information, they were saying that they felt like they deserved it and they didn't want to give any information about their abusers. They didn't want to give them up. Anna was the adopted child, and she was the only one who hadn't suffered any form of abuse. Okay, so now let's rewind to 2005 when all of this kind of started, and at this point Clara is living with just her 2 biological boys, Jacob and Andre, and they have an amazing, just happy life. Clara's a really great mother. They go to good schools, they celebrate their birthdays in really fun ways, they're learning languages, they're, you know, playing sports, which they love playing sports. Every year they get to go to these summer camps that they really like, and they just have a really happy life. Now, Pretty much all of this changed when her sister Katarina came to visit her, and she brought this 13-year-old girl named Annika. Now, Annika was a Norwegian orphan, and Katarina was looking after her because she was actually on the run from a child sex trafficking gang back in Norway. She describes stories of horrible sexual abuse and molestation that she had to go through, and it was so bad that she still had traits of infancy even though she was 13 years old. She also unfortunately was seriously ill and had a whole bunch of illnesses like leukemia, kidney failure, she was going blind, she was also going deaf, and as a result, she had to spend the majority of her time in hospital. So Clara was kind of described in the media as weak and easily manipulated, and she accepted Annika into her home with loving arms and agreed to care for her like one of her own. The only thing was that Katarina insisted on taking Annika to the hospital every single time. Clara never went with her, which was weird because Clara had to call Annika at the hospital every single day, multiple times a day. And what was even weirder about this is that she would have to talk to Annika through the phone, even though Annika was unconscious, and the doctor on the phone would transcribe what she was saying so that Annika could hear her mum while she was unconscious. So it was kind of a weird situation to begin with, but then Clara starts getting these emails and texts from this mystery doctor. So he claimed to be Annika's doctor and claimed to know how to treat Annika well. She only met this doctor one time, and it was midnight, it was in a car, it was so dark that she couldn't see his face, but he gave her Annika's medical records and also showed her his diplomatic passport. So for her, that was kind of just guaranteed authority. She's like, okay, he's got her medical records, he showed me his diplomatic passport, so he must be legit. And then she just trusted him and believed everything that he said. So anyway, in these texts that she receives from this doctor, he starts telling her different ways or how she's meant to treat Annika. And one of the main treatments was that she had to rub Annika's body all over, but especially the crotch area, for several hours because this would make Annika happy. Through these texts and emails, she was also always getting bad news, like that she was going blind, that her hearing wasn't doing well, or that her heart was failing. As it turns out, Annika was actually a 31-year-old woman named Barbara Skrylova. And she had graduated from university, the University of Dramatic Arts. She was also friends with Katarina, who was a very mysterious person in this case. We still really don't know anything about Katarina. Barbara taped her breasts up and even got a breast reduction and also liposuction so that she could look like this 13-year-old girl. And despite all of her detailed descriptions about the sexual abuse that she suffered, she had never had sexual intercourse. I mean, she did kind of look like a kid, but she was meant to be this Norwegian orphan. But when she was, describing what she had gone through and talking to Carla, she was speaking in another language, but with absolutely no Norwegian accent, which should have been a red flag, but... So anyway, back to the text. I just wanted to explain that a little bit before we spoke about this text, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. But Clara received a text saying that Annika had been abducted from the hospital, and Clara, of course, was freaking out. She was like, she's been through so much and now she's been abducted from the hospital. And Clara at this point really cared for her, felt bad for her, and loved her as one of her own. So she was extremely worried. Meanwhile, Barbara was actually just on a holiday in the mountains. And as it turns out, that all of these messages and emails that Clara was getting were all coming from Annika, Barbara's, and Katarina's phones and computers. So as I mentioned before, Clara was described as easily manipulated and a little bit weak, which is why they chose her in the first place. And Barbara had absolutely no problems getting the documents to prove or to confirm that she was actually this 13-year-old girl called Annika. She decided that she wanted to be this Annika character, and Clara made it a lot easier for her because she gave her a home, which, cemented her in the Czech Republic and made it easier for her to get these documents. So Katerina and Joseph Skrilar, who was Barbara's father, actually helped her to get the documents proving or cementing that she was this 13-year-old girl. Okay, so now let's fast forward a little bit to 2006. At this point, Clara has started paying less attention to her boys. They're kind of getting neglected because I guess she wanted to help Annika. She'd been through so much and she just felt bad for her and wanted to help her to be happy and recover from all these illnesses and all the things that she had gone through in Norway. So the boys start spending more time with their grandparents, and Clara decided that she was going to adopt Annika. The only problem with this adoption is that the doctor that had been messaging and emailing Clara said that the adoption wouldn't be possible because Jacob and Andre were being so mean to Annika that they wouldn't allow the adoption. He suggested that Clara needed to cure the boys' evil spirits with some therapy. He recommended tough love, physical punishments, and very hard discipline. So Clara started doing exactly that. She would beat them for the absolute smallest reasons. It's like she was looking for reasons to beat them. She used her bare hands, she used belts, she used a wooden spoon, and she started locking them in these really small little rooms and would leave them there when they've done something wrong overnight. Eventually, by August of 2006, the doctor said that the punishment clearly wasn't working and that they needed shock therapy. He said that Clara needed to stop acting like their mother and that she needed to take them to a cottage in a place called Viverska Tiska. And this was like a very small rural town just surrounded by nature. So at this cottage, they met up with Jan Skrilar, who was Barbara's brother. They also met up with Jan Turek, who Clara had actually met at a summer camp previously that I mentioned that the boys and her used to go on. And they also met up with Hanna Basova, who they had also met on a summer camp. And Katerina, Clara's sister, was also there. At this cottage, Jacob and Andre go through the most horrific torture. They're kept in these little dog cages, which obviously they're boys, and these are dog cages. They were so small that they couldn't even get up. They were constantly on their knees. They had to eat in there. They had to do their business in there. So they were basically living in their own excrement again. They weren't allowed to talk to each other. They weren't allowed to talk to anybody, not even Clara. And that is when the physical torture started. Clara started to dunk their heads in water for so long that they thought they were going to drown. And at the same time, Katerina would hold their hands back so they couldn't fight their mother. They burnt them with cigarettes, they scratched them with forks, they sexually abused them, they made them fight each other, and they also tied their hands and legs up behind their back. Both of the Jans started to join in on this as well. They would tie bags around their heads and they would burn them with cigarettes. They also would cut off flesh from Andre's butt and they would burn the spot where they had removed the flesh with cigarettes. They also forced him to eat his own flesh. They also sliced off some of his skin so they could eat their flesh themselves, also while forcing them to eat it. And at the same time, they were taping his mouth shut so that he couldn't scream. And Annika herself also joined in. She would dunk their heads into the buckets and she would also kind of fuel the torture by telling them that, or telling the adults that the boys were being mean to her, when she knew that telling them that would make them want to torture them more, because obviously they're there torturing them apparently so that they would stop being mean to her. And if it's not working... So this went on for about 8 days, and Annika, they pretended to torture her as well so that the boys, thought that she was also being tortured. And in September of 2006, Clara decided to start the adoption process again. Now, the problem was the district court required DNA for any adoption processes, but Annika's doctor was like, nope, you can't have any DNA. He said that it would be too dangerous, and then also I'm not sure why this happened, but somehow they managed to convince Victor Scalar, who was the daughter of a local actor, to stand in court as Annika for the adoption process. So a lot of these articles explaining this case are not in English, so it's kind of hard for me to translate it, but I think it may have been because they needed Victor's DNA, but the thing that confuses me is that DNA would come up that it's Victor's. So I don't know if they used her DNA or if they refused the DNA or why they had Victor come in. The only explanation I could think of, because I couldn't find this translated, is that they were using her DNA. Either way, whatever they did, wherever Victor was there, the whole process worked and Clara was able to adopt Annika. So then after the adoption became official, Clara gave her biological sons to Katerina to look after so that she could solely care for and solely look after Annika. And Clara claims that reason she did this is because Annika still needed so much help and so much attention, and that Katerina was her sister, so she knew that they were in good hands. In January of 2007, Jacob and Andre and Katerina moved back in with Clara and Annika in a new house in Kurim, the little yellow house that the doctor had found for them. Unfortunately, while they were there, the boys were more often than not kept in the little cement closet cellar that Andre was found in, and they were still being tortured. Probably, Annika was saying something that the boys were being mean to her. Meanwhile, Annika was in this bright room with lots of toys, lots of light, and she was very happy, and Clara was looking after her very well. And this brings us to May of 2007, when the horrible discovery on the baby monitor was found. So Clara and Katerina were arrested, and the 3 children were put into a home called Klokenek, which while they were there, Annika, or Barbara, ran away and disappeared. She first went to Denmark and then she went to Oslo in Norway, and while she was there, she impersonated another 13-year-old child, except this time it was a 13-year-old boy named Adam. Adam Farner was placed in an emergency youth shelter due to claims of horrible abuse from his father. But in mid-December 2007, he disappeared, and there were missing posters literally everywhere for this boy. Eventually, he was spotted in a northern city called Tromsø, and from there he was placed in a youth shelter again before he was transported back to Oslo in Norway. But he wasn't actually returned to Oslo at all. It was Barbara, 33-year-old Barbara. So, as I mentioned, Katerina and Clara weren't the only ones who were involved in this, and there were other people, such as the people at the cottage, who were involved in torturing Jacob and Andre. Well, all of these people were connected to Joseph Skrilla. If you remember, that's Barbara's father, and he is super mysterious. We really don't know a lot about him. But apparently he was the leader of an offshoot of the Grail movement cult called the Ants. Now, Martin Farner and his wife, Adam Farner's parents, were actually a part of this little offshoot of the Grail movement cult, which is why they let Barbara impersonate their son. They used her son's passport to first smuggle her into Denmark and then into Norway because at the time she was already a fugitive. There were reports that Joseph and his aunts were trying to present Barbara as this child messiah. When she was with Clara, the whole purpose behind it was to present her as this child messiah so that they could gain more followers for their little mutant offshoot of this cult. Barbara herself says that the reason she did it was just a way to cope with and get away from reality. But everyone else from the cult claims differently. But yeah, as I mentioned, Joseph is a very mysterious character. We don't know a lot about him, and there's also no concrete evidence that the ants even exist. Investigators were the ones who discovered that they may have been a little mutant offshoot of the religious movement. So then on May 19th, a Czech newspaper, I don't know the name, but I know that it has DNES at the end. They reported all of this, saying that they were part of this cult and that this cult tortures people, makes them eat their own flesh. And then, of course, as the media does, a bunch of other media outlets also started saying the same thing, that the Grail movement are child torturers, they eat human flesh, you know, like they're this scary, crazy cult. But that isn't true at all about the Grail movement. So they actually ended up suing successfully DNES, and they had to like pull their story. So yeah, who knows if it's a real thing or not. To me, it seems probable because, I mean, what other explanation is there? All of these people, they know each other, they kind of follow each other like a cult. I don't know how they are or if they're even connected to the Grail movement, but it does seem like they are their own little cult, I guess. So the case obviously went to trial. Clara, Katerina, Barbara, both Jans and Hannah were all tried. So Clara was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Katerina was sentenced to 10. Barbara was sentenced to 5, which is crazy to me that she got the lowest sentence, considering I feel like she is the main instigator of the whole thing. But anyway, Jane Turek got 5 years. Jan Turek and Jan Skrilar got 7 years, while Hannah Basova also got 7 years. Honestly, in my opinion, all of these sentences are just way too light. They literally tortured these 2 boys who were 8 and 9 years old. So that is the whole case. That's all of the information of the case. Obviously, it is mostly in another language. So if I did miss something or translate something wrong, please feel free to comment it down in the comments if you know of anything, because I would love to hear it. I'm sure everyone else would. And I would also love to hear your thoughts on this case, if you think they were part of a cult or what you think went on. But to end on a little bit of a more positive note, Jacob and Andre are both confident young men now, doing really well, and Andre actually uploaded a status to Facebook, which I'm going to put on the screen for you guys to read right now. But it's the end of this video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye!